And
Finally!
Yahweh says, "Hey, Mr. Trump, we got a problem." And
you know what? I'm gonna let's watch Barnes, and we'll hear his rant on it, and then I'll get your, and then I'm gonna, anytime you feel like you want to like weigh in on something he says, let's feel free to just holler at me, and I'll just I'll pull up. All right.
Yeah. It's wrong that they're lying. So what are they omitting in this indictment that would be exculpatory? What are Trump's not just legal defenses, but factual defenses to these otherwise damning allegations? I think I've done a good job summarizing it. Robert, let me know if I missed anything, but what is your take and what is your interpretation?
The fundamental flaw of Turley's analysis, Sean Trende made a similar kind of analysis where he said it was okay that Hillary Clinton walked, but it was okay to prosecute Trump. How Sean Trende at Real Clear Politics pretends to be anything other than a Trump hater now. He's been caught lying repeatedly about Trump. Tom Bevan at Real Clear Politics should reassess who he has there. Sean's an old friend of mine, but he's gone full TDS for a while, ever since he went up to Ohio State. There's one core problem with all of these claims. This is the elected president of the United States. He determines if a document's classified or not. He determines a document is secret or not. He determines whether it's a government document or not.
Can you pause it real quick?
Do that?
Yeah. Oh, that's what that means? Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. Yes, and also yes, Barnes, yes, Barnes, yes, Barnes. And this is the big problem with this case. And Barnes is spot on here. And I don't want to like pause it every 2 seconds or whatever, but like this is a critical juncture question. The question of, did Trump remove these documents from the White House to personal residences and business offices that are not connected to the presidency? Yeah. Yes, he did. Sure. Like that's obvious. They retrieved them from those locations. That doesn't ever have seemed to be in question. The real question, and what Tom Cotton was talking about this the other day, and he referred to, he kind of made the comparison between Biden and Clinton and all these other people with documents. And he said, the president of the United States should not be indicted federally on an edge case, on a novel legal theory. And the novel legal theory here is that we don't actually have any freaking idea how the requirements to declassify a document can actually bind a sitting president who is the executive branch. The executive authority is vested in the president of the United States. That is the first line of Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, not the executive authority as established by rules promulgated by the executive branch departments is vested in a president subject to those rules. All of the departments and their processes for declassifying documents bind departments. Can they bind up to a president? Can Congress bind a president's ability to declassify a document by creating a legal process through the executive branch that needs to be followed? That's a constitutional separation of powers question. And the idea that we can put these processes in to ultimately stop the king from being king is not solid, right? Like this is, we're in completely, they keep saying, well, this is the first president to be federally indicted. Yeah, it's the first one to be federally indicted. That should tell you something about how much legal precedent there is for actually prosecuting this case against a former president who did this while being president. And so that's the problem with this entire theory. And we may have an immediate Supreme Court case on this to say, hey, you can create all these things, but ultimately the president himself is vested the power, and he's not able to have that power stripped of him just to do so. And a great example of this that is it's contemporary and it's highly in the president's favor and it's really effing frustrating for us non-statists is the difference between a treaty and an executive agreement. Okay, so a treaty is mentioned in the Constitution that a treaty is legally binding. It's a legally binding document between two nations that is presented by a president and approved by 2/3 of the Senate, right? Ratify the treaty. An executive agreement has the exact same legal force as a treaty, but it doesn't require any Senate approval. But it's because the president is the executive of the United States and can make an agreement with another executive of a foreign nation independent of the Senate. There isn't a requirement to do it, and they can bind us by law under those same things. The thing about a treaty is it is more politically expedient. You have not only the president, but the will of the Senate going in the same direction. So it's better for marketing to the people, but the legal effect is the exact same. That's because just because there is a process for treaties to exist that requires Senate approval doesn't mean you can bind the president away from making an executive agreement with another nation, because he is the sole organ of foreign relations. And the sole organ test is long held under the Supreme Court that the president has plenary authority to make these sort of agreements, decisions, and barter with other nations as the head of the executive branch. Just because there is a process that the president may use to declassify documents that's laid out in law does not mean that the president is necessarily required to use that process. People do not necessarily understand that just because a process exists that a president follows does not mean that the president has to follow that process.
Right.
It is politically expedient to do so. The pardon process is another beautiful example. There is a pardon process that the president can follow. Pardons are recommended. There's a pardon review board. They make recommendations then further to the president. He decides on the pardon. He doesn't have to do that though, right? The president could just wake up and go, I pardon Joe Neerman for any crime he may have ever committed federally forever.
Right.
Why? I don't know. God told me to.
Right.
The Jew connection came down, and
Finally!
Yahweh says, "Hey, Mr. Trump, we got a problem." And I mean, look, guys, we're covering this, of course, but if you really want to see the Barnes video, you can always go watch the Barnes video, and you should. Barnes is brilliant. Viva is awesome. They run a great show. And we can interject our commentary. But if we don't get to the whole thing, go watch this video.
Oh, we're not going to get to the whole thing. We're not going to get to the whole thing at all. But we're both huge fans of both Viva Frei and Robert Barnes, and strongly urge you to check out the balance of the video, whatever parts we don't get to here, because I think that it's had a lot of views, and rightfully so, because he does a great job of breaking down this thing. So let's go a little forward.
Justice Department can't do that. The intelligence community can't do that. This is an indictment saying Donald Trump used his own documents, kept his own documents, liked his own documents, and didn't want to give his own documents back. That's his constitutional right.
That's essentially what it is.
So the problem with this case is
technically it's a violation of the
bogus. Instead, this is an attempt of the deep state to overturn our constitutional democracy, to say that they can tell the world when their secrets get to be disclosed. That's what this case is premised on. Donald Trump rebutting the lies of General Milley, who lied to Bob Woodward, who claimed that he had stopped Trump from waging war in Iran, when it was actually Trump that stopped Milley from waging war in Iran. Now here Milley is, by the admission of the indictment, leaking actual information that he was not entitled to disclose, that he was not entitled to declassify, that he was not entitled to declare a personal record, that is subject to national security information laws, because he is a lesser official subject to those laws. And yet there has been no indictment, not even investigation of Milley, and he's still in legal office today with Republicans in Congress doing jack about it. By contrast, the president, who is vested by the second article of the United States Constitution with all executive power. That means the president decides any information that comes in is classified for his benefit and his alone. It is only
pause it real quick. This is short, I promise.
Okay.
I promise.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, Article 1, Section 1, the first words are the legislative power as defined in this Constitution is vested in a Congress that'll be made up of a House and a Senate. All right. The first line of Article 2, Section 1 is the executive power is vested in a president of the United States. Article 1, Section 1, Article 1 is the longest article of the Constitution because they had to create the legislative power. They had to lay out what the legislature had. It's all written down. There isn't a known legislative power. At the time the Constitution was written, 1791 ratification, 1780 for writing, whenever they wrote it, doesn't same time frame. There is a known executive power because there are kings all over the fucking planet. So they know what the executive power is. And that's a critical difference between Article 1, Section 1's first sentence and Article 2, Section 1's first sentence. And that difference matters tremendously here because the president has a set of assumed power and he has a bunch of people under him in the executive branch to make that power manifest because it spans this giant nation. But the power rests in him. So all executive authority is plenary to the president. Congress doesn't have a centralized figure that holds the power. They have these two bodies. These bodies have to make rules by which that they operate. And guess what? That's written in the Constitution as well, that Congress will make rules about how it works. There is not a section that Congress nor the executive branch will make rules about the president's execution of his executive authority. If the president has executive authority, he is king, just king for 4 years. And we so overlook the power of the president because our presidents generally have acted gentlemanly to the other branches of government. But we see times when the president's power is tested and it's always bigger than we think.